Welcome to Making Our Way Forward, a podcast where we share compelling life stories and learn from the experience of everyday entrepreneurs. At NACCE, we celebrate diversity and invite you to join the conversation as we talk to entrepreneurs and leaders from all walks of life. We hope that by telling their stories, we bring you inspiration, empower you to take action, and ignite entrepreneurship in your community. Welcome to Making Our Way Forward podcast. We're actually making our way forward to the end of 2021, and we're rounding up the year with a really interesting look at two people that have really impacted my life professionally and the growth of NACCE in really important ways. So I have two guests with us today, and we're going to have a conversation with Dan Jackson, who is an educator and a forward-thinking leader in the classroom of a high school, and our own producer, Nataliia Berezhna, who has really gotten the Making Our Way Forward podcast off the ground. So she's going to share some lessons that she's learned, and we're going to see how these two people, their lives have intersected with one another. So welcome to the show. Dan, let's jump in and talk to you. One thing I love about you that I've heard about you from Nataliia is you use a lot of Winnie the Pooh references. So I thought maybe you could kick us off telling us a little bit about your background and what about Winnie the Pooh speaks to you and why is that part of your own personal brand?
Actually, I should start with thanking Nataliia and Becky for having me here. I appreciate it, definitely. The Winnie the Pooh is, I have an icon for my email and the like in which he's reaching up into a pot of honey. And I have the analogy that the honey or the pot of honey is life. And he is trying to get every last drop out of life. Also, if you take a look at Winnie the Pooh, he has his thoughtful spot. When something goes wrong or he needs to fix something, he goes to his thoughtful spot, he processes it, and he goes, think. And he comes up with solutions. He's very industrious, very resourceful. He's friends with everybody. I can't think of a better icon to have as a character.
Yeah, indeed. And I think that speaks to a little bit about you and how you see the world and how you approach opportunity. So Dan, before we jump to Nataliia, tell us a little bit about who you are. Where did you grow up? What kind of career sort of led you into the classroom?
Well, thank you. My having grown up, I don't think I'm there yet. So let's not say that. Still growing. I was actually adopted at 6 weeks old, and I knew it from the very time I could listen and talk. And that was back in Grosse Pointe, Michigan. And my parents separated when I was about 4 or 5. And so I learned flexibility, adaptability, networking, making new friends at a very early age. Because I ended up going to 9 schools in 7 years from the time I was in 5th grade until the time I actually graduated high school. And so I've always been willing to put my hand out there, always willing to network and the like. My career began after a horrid high school career and a horrid freshman year in college. I left, and the greatest thing that ever happened to me was that my mother said, great decision to leave college. Now you can leave the house. And so at 18, I was putting my own food on the table, paying my own rent, paying my own car payments. And I realized that the work and the responsibility and the maturity that was required to actually grow up, if you will. Eventually went back to South Carolina, got my Bachelor of Science in Marketing, graduated cum laude after having a horrible freshman year. Then went on and got my Master's of Business Administration at Indiana University, which at the time of my graduation was a top 10 business school in the country. And from there, I went to the corporate world, and I spent about 12 or 13 years there and kind of worked my way up the proverbial corporate ladder, if you will. And the towers came down in 2001, as you know. And like a lot of other people, my wife and I kind of reevaluated, and I had always enjoyed teaching and wanted to be in teaching. And I decided at that time that I was ready to make the move. I was talking with my wife a few months ago as we were putting together something for, I don't know, another podcast or something. And I said, can you remember, Jackie, when I really began talking about teaching? And she said to me, yes, it was at our senior prom in high school
Oh my
when you were
gosh.
telling me that you would like to be a teacher. And I said, wow, I think I do remember that. So another part of my story that wouldn't be complete without it is that I'm married to the same woman for 30 years that I've known for 38 years since my rising senior summer of high school. I couldn't have done a lot of the things that I have done and made the moves that I have without her.
Oh, wow. There's so much there. And I can see, too, when you talk about sort of rough starts or, false starts, if you will, one of the things that we do in our work with community colleges is really evangelize the open access of them, and many I've seen, oh my gosh, I've seen many cases, people with stories very similar
Mm-hmm.
to yours. They are not ready to be in a university classroom, or it's just not the right time in life. So that's a great way to start. Now I'm going to turn over to you, Nataliia, because as Dan was talking about Winnie the Pooh, I was thinking about you as one of really the blessings of moving here to Raleigh and moving our office to Cary, because truly you are one of the sweetest, kindest people that I have met. So you're always co-creating things and you do so much behind the scenes, but I'd like you to kind of jump out there and maybe share with us a bit about, your experience. You aren't from the United States. And so I don't know if you want to talk a bit about where you came from and how you arrived here and maybe what you're doing. And then we can explore a little bit more in the podcast world, how this brought us together, the work that you and Dan have done together.
Thank you so much, Becky. Thank you so much, Dan. It's such a pleasure for me also to be here. And just for our audience, I'm Ukrainian and I come from Ukraine, where I spent last years of my career working for the U.S. Agency for International Development. And in that role, I was a project manager doing transformational work in financial sector, in private sector development, supporting businesses, youth entrepreneurship, women. And I always was amazed at the spirit, at the energy that was flowing around entrepreneurship while I wasn't an entrepreneur myself. And I never considered myself entrepreneur. And then after long years working for the government, having great performance track record, we applied for the residency in the United States and we were approved with my son. And the reason we wanted to go is that my son wanted to go and ride that yellow bus to school. So that was one of his dreams when he went to Washington, D.C. with me when I was getting one of my awards. And I thought to myself, what if he had that chance to go to a US school, see the difference, and just travel across the world and trying to make the living? So that was that leap of faith, as they call it, when we came. And that one of those orientation visits to a high school, when I was there for my son, as I was walking down the corridor of Apex Friendship High School, I noticed on the door business, entrepreneurship, financial literacy skills, and the name. So the door was half open, I believe, and I just knocked on the door and I introduced myself. Dan Jackson was in the class. And he didn't push me away. He didn't say like, okay, is there anything I can do for you? He just asked, welcome, please come in. So we had some conversation and I started saying, hey, this is something I've been doing for quite a long time back at USCID. This is some topics that I know. Maybe you need someone who can be in your class in some role as a backup teacher, or maybe as some of the somebody who can give a lecture about financial literacy, because we did this national financial literacy training in Ukraine. And he said, well, let's talk. Can you kind of exchange some contact information? Give me a call when you're done and we can talk about this. Later, I realized that his main mission was accelerating the extraordinary talent. And he explained to me how he brings high school students into his classroom and he teaches him these principles of entrepreneurship. And he invited me, he just gave me the stage sort of, and he just gave me that chance to try myself in a setting where I would teach to students, to high school students, the same age as my son. And that felt amazing. I was preparing, I was in my project manager role, and I thought, how can I bring value to his classroom? And then we had first episode and Mr. Jackson then he gave me great feedback and I did again and again. And then I learned that he has a nonprofit organization with the mission that he wants to promote entrepreneurship education in high school system. And I was volunteering with him and with his colleagues. And we attended this huge gathering in Raleigh. That was the Global Entrepreneurship Week, right? Oh, no.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. When NCID Tom Rue had his huge forum, some 500 policymakers, leaders, entrepreneurs were in that setting. And I was just in my natural spirit, just tweeting about this, just going from one table to the other, meeting people. And I thought, wow, this is my world. I see people that create change with their actions, with their businesses. And then when I got into the room was so full and there was hardly a place at a table. And the table where we sat, it was busy. So I looked up, there was a spot at the table where Becky sat with her team. And I asked, like, would you mind if I sit here? And she says, yeah, you're welcome. Please have a seat here. In a moment, Becky walked up the stage and she made an announcement that about the National Association for Community College Entrepreneurship. I saw a huge map on the screen with different states and spot on the map, different community colleges. And she was talking about education, about resources for entrepreneurs, about networking opportunities and people. And I thought, wow, that sounds like a dream job to have. And then she announced that we are opening to open office in Cary in North Carolina. And I just said, that's interesting. I mean, and that was just like my thing. I kept tweeting and I took some pictures and photos. And then we talked and she suggested that maybe I can send my CV because they were hiring some people. And that's how we got connected. That's why I feel that my meeting back, it wouldn't be possible without you, Dan. And I'm so grateful to both of you for just giving me that credit of trust and welcoming me into your classroom, and for Becky welcoming me at the table where you were sitting with Katie Gales and Jeff. And there were, I believe, so many, I met so many great individuals. So that's the point where my life and my career turned corner, as I would say, because I found myself working in a nonprofit in the world of entrepreneurship where I can bring the change with my project management skills.
So what's interesting to tell you about what you just said is knocking on the door. You talked about walking down the hallway and it was partially open and you knocked on it and you pushed the door open, and it could have gone either way. You could have had a smiling face of Dan and him welcoming you in as potentially part of his world or not. And likewise, you could have sat at my table and I could have said, nope, that seat is not available. But I think there's a good lesson for everyone who's listening, knock on that door. I mean, what's the worst thing that could happen? Somebody could have said no. And it's interesting to me too. And we talk about this with some of our guests about sort of the role of serendipity. And, sometimes if you really get a good vision, like something as simple as having your son ride a yellow school bus, which I understand is a thing for people over in Europe. They don't understand why school buses are yellow in the United States, which is funny because I would not have ever thought that was something that people would think about. But it's interesting as well in terms of even thinking about the classroom, Dan. We had talked about an author that we both, and a person that we both admire so much, Ted Dintersmith, who is a venture capitalist that traveled all over the world and looked for pockets of excellence in classrooms and was maybe a little bit disheartened that there weren't more of them, but was hugely encouraged by the name of his book, What School Could Be. So tell us, what is it like to be in Dan Jackson's classroom? If I'm a high school student, like what does that look like for me on a daily basis, or what are some of the things that I'm going to learn during the year?
Well, I appreciate that question. I just want to kind of tap into something that you touched on with regards to knocking on the door. And it's kind of a two-way street there, one of which is, and I say to my students often, what's the worst thing that can happen? Is it somebody says no. So it never hurts to ask reasonably and professionally. Ask about anything and everything. Also, with regards to opening up doors, I also try to tell them that you never know who it is that you're talking to. And you should always be as kind and as generous as you possibly can be. Because you could be talking to your next boss, or you could be talking to a private investor or an angel investor, and you never know. So it's easy to do that with people like Nataliia, and I'm glad to see that she and I have connected. In my classroom, it's experiential entrepreneurship. It's very little reading. There are no study guides. There are zero tests. There are study guides that I do give to people, but they're not required to complete, if you will. I believe that you learn best by taking your knowledge that you've picked up from reading or research, and then applying that to your business plan in school. And it was Dr. Tony Wagner, I believe, who says that the world does not care about how much you know. What the world cares about is what you do with what you know. And I wish more universities and the things were actually picking up on that and not just cramming people full of more tests and more worksheets. And I didn't even say high schools, mind you, I said universities.
Yeah.
Being in my classroom, it's very free thinking. It's very open. It's their business plan. It's what it is that they want to do. We spend time doing self-discovery. What motivates you? Looking at the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, trying to identify problems that they might be interested in helping to solve. They're not required to tackle a UN SDG, but many of them do. I have right now probably 4 or 5 different business plans that are being worked on using plastics that are cleaned up from the ocean and turned into filaments in order to make other products. And so they're making products. One of them is making a product, set of school supplies from these recycled plastic that can be sold to school districts that might be Title I or a little less advantaged than other school districts. Another one is doing football equipment for youth sports, where the expense to participate in youth sports is too great because of the equipment and things that they need. They're going to take recycled plastic and make shoulder pads out of it to help sell. The students' compassion and the students' interest in what's happening in the world and how they can help fix it just continues to blow me away. What it's like in my classroom, not a whole lot of lights on oftentimes, always music on, and people always talking. I want it to be a beehive of activity, like Winnie the Pooh wants to go and find the beehive.
That's right. That's right. It's almost like if you think, I think when my kids were little, you'd go in to read to the class and people are excited about learning, especially in second grade. If you've ever had that experience, and the kids, they want to get closer and they can't wait to absorb that. And then somewhere along the way that they're told to be quiet and to sit still and to take your turn. And so I'm really excited to see that you teach in that way, and that you're kind of opening up people's minds. Now, all of us, humanity has lived through this pandemic, which is still going on for 2 years. So those of us who embrace entrepreneurial mindset and action, I think probably have fared better because we've had to do different things. And one of the things that I said to you earlier, Nataliia, and I mean this very sincerely, is that one of the projects that I'm really proud of that we got off the ground was this podcast. It was something that I had wanted to do for a couple of years. And I thought, if we're going to do it, we need to do it well. And we didn't really have the resources or the time. Well, lo and behold, with the pandemic, we might not have had all the resources, but we had lots of time. So I would like for you to just share with us, with Dan and I in the audience, how did you approach getting something that you'd not really known how to do either, but it kind of leans into your skill set? How did you approach getting it off the ground? And what were maybe 1 or 2 things that you learned through the process that you'd like to share with people that might have an interest in starting a podcast themselves?
We just innovate and we take what's already there. And as a project manager, I learned working for international development, that there is always a solution. If this solution to an issue, to a problem, to a challenge, to a customer, something that they want to do is not available locally, it will be available in your neighborhood. It will be available maybe internationally. So first thing we did, we had a great marketing team. So we talked within our team and we just compared our notes to see what is it that we know together about this podcasting. Then we reached out to our networks, and we were lucky that we had in our networks people who already were podcasting, and we got some great insights in terms of how they use it, which platforms, what equipment they use. And then there was the research stage when you also look and you compare about cost, about the schedule, and then the whole thing about starting a podcast. You don't start it just for the sake of podcast. There are so many podcasters these days, and you want to be unique with your own voice. And you need to have a strategy and you need to have values built into that podcast so that you are consistent, you're authentic, and you know why you're doing this. So for us, we were also looking in terms of, you remember the discussions that we had? It was about the name, like how would you name it? Because there is a saying like the name you name your ship, that's the way it's going to float on waters, right? So making our way forward was something that we unanimously agreed right away, because that was such a catchy name and we all needed to have that making our way forward slogan in our life. As well as we were looking about, is it that we want to, for people to learn more about our organization or the great networks that we have, and why people listen to podcasts? they want to learn something new. They want to meet someone. They do not necessarily have means or ways to meet that person. They want to get inspired, or maybe they want to stimulate some of their creative energy. They want to learn something. So that was just the whole thing in terms of the concept stage took a while. But then the technical part is just about the right equipment, the platform that you need to use. And there like that goes. But the main key theme is about the content. What is it that you are feeding into that stream of digital media on a weekly basis to keep it interesting, live, so people can relate to this? So that's the journey.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to think about it and to approach it. And I know you've been approached by other people to, help them try to think these things through as a creative problem solver and kind of leaning into your project management expertise. So one of the things I think that both of you have hit on, that's something that's very important to me, is really, presenting with empathy, is really trying to have that deep empathy for others, who may not have the resources or the skills that the three of us have. But I'd also like to toss out there too, the idea of forgiveness, forgiveness of self and others. Because I always say this, if I'm talking with students or talking even with my kids or something like that, I try to think about like how you always try to put forward the best version of yourself so that you're authentic, but you're really trying to always become that best person. I would love it if, as we conclude, maybe Dan, you could go first, and then Nataliia, you could go and talk about maybe a lesson that you've learned through the pandemic or through your work where things have not gone perfectly, and how have you used that to help you along your journey. So it's what we call, I have on my desk right here, lemons, right? So that's part of the entrepreneurial equation. So it doesn't have to be something that's still upsetting you, but maybe just some little thing that you tried that didn't work well, and what you might have learned from that.
Oh. Wow, I could probably pull out an entire file of that. The last 2 years have been by far the most physically and emotionally exhausting that I have been through in the classroom. And I have still written on my board the other day, we had the internet go out throughout the area and didn't have it at school at all. There are a number of schools in the area, just wasn't Apex Friendship. And so the kids were like, oh, it's like a free day. And I said, time out. This isn't your typical class. We're entrepreneurs, and entrepreneurs see obstacles as opportunities to exercise agility, adaptability, initiative, and creative problem solving. We're facing an obstacle right now, and we're going to get work done. How are we going to get it done? So there's a lesson there for the students to say, hey, you know what, just because we're presented with a problem doesn't mean we have to see it as a stop measure. We're just going to stop everything. So there's just one example right there. I was just having a discussion with a student right after school outside, and she said, I'm really nervous, Mr. Jackson. I have Duke's early decision notices are coming out tomorrow. And I said to her, well, what's making you anxious? She said, well, this is what I've always wanted. And I said, if you put your best foot forward, and you're the best you that you can be, and you've done the very best you can with integrity to your own principles, your own values, and what makes you tick. If one school says no, it's not about you. Doubt what you will, but never doubt yourself. And you should have yourself the moment, the little pity party, if you will. And then we got to move on, because the world's going to keep on going. She goes, you're right. Thank you.
Oh, that's good advice. Someone needs to hear that today. And gosh, that's great. I wish more young people could have people, delivering that advice. So Nataliia, how about you?
As a project manager, we study risk management. We look in terms of how to deal with uncertainty, what is known, what is unknown. So that was helpful. But also something that I learned a long time ago is that writing on the wall from the book Who Moved My Cheese. And that book is also, it's about, you remember, like the change happens, anticipate change, you should smell the change often and be ready to move and adjust to the change and enjoy it. And what I learned also is that, yes, you can't control everything, you can't control certain things, regardless how many risk strategies you may have, things may happen and you might not anticipate it. So the quick part was about how to really move beyond that point, how to let go of those things. And what I learned through NACCE is that effectuation model that Becky speaks a lot about. What is your bird in hand opportunity right now, right? And then the other one is about the power of your partnerships, and also how to make lemonade out of all of those, or the crazy quilt, or how to be the pilot in that plane. So pulling those different pieces into my life helps me both professionally and personally. And also, what I learned even through this podcast journey is that something that used to be my hobby, I used to make videos and that was just like fun part of my life. But now I do it professionally as well, learning a lot in terms of how to record certain things and how to produce audio and video. But also, I believe I gained that how to be a good listener, how to stay behind the scene to hear the message. Because as we record, I'm also trying to come up with a title, pulling out some of the pieces that would become a copy potentially about how to promote this podcast. And also, as I do post-production on this podcast, it's often that in one conversation, you don't listen and you don't hear everything, as sometimes we need to read the book twice. Sometimes you need to listen to that conversation several times, bookmark that podcast or that particular something that relates to you, because that's the thing that people would remember, something that relates to them in a particular moment of life. If you listen to a podcast in 3 months and then you think like, okay, you picked up something else. And that's why I really enjoy this. And I think the podcast journey and plus all this change and being with NACCE and growing with them in my entrepreneurial mindset also helped me move forward in my own entrepreneurial journey. When I was more bold in terms of reaching out to community college, tapping into resources of small business centers, and really looking into about, okay, Nataliia, if you were to start your own business, what can you bring as value to people? It's not about you, what you can do. It's about what do they need? How can you bring value to them? So that was my lessons through the pandemic.
Yeah, I'm gonna tack onto that if you don't mind.
Please.
It's funny. I read Stephen Covey every single day, and as a part of my morning reflection, that I usually spend about 30 or 40 minutes just waking up slowly and kind of getting centered. But what I was reading in particular from 7 Habits of Highly Effective People was that he was talking about communication and the 4 forms of communication: reading, writing, speaking, and listening. And you go through school, almost all of school, learning reading, writing, and speaking. When do we ever get taught how to listen? How to truly be active listeners, to acknowledge, to ask questions, to not always be thinking about what it is that you're going to say. And it was so critical, I think, what Nataliia just said there. And it's part of the design thinking process that is such a part of entrepreneurship. And it's the empathy and the clearly defining of the problem. And you're not going to be able to clearly define the problem unless you have that empathy and you have those true listening skills.
Yeah, that's so well said. Our guest last week, Frank Laney, who's a mediator, gave the example of, encountering a person who is blind. And if you didn't really talk to that person, you might just naturally leap to the conclusion that that was their problem that they wanted to solve for, but maybe that's not their problem. Maybe their problem is that they feel disconnected, and they need some sort of other type of assistance. And I think sometimes we make assumptions, and that's what I love about this program is the opportunity, obviously, to work with people like you that care deeply about other people and are pushing the dial to make the world a better place. Dan, if people wanted to learn more about your work and connect with you, how would they do that? Do you have a website, or how would they learn more about the things that you're working on?
Yeah, absolutely. There is the specifically the education related business that I'm in. You could find me at appliedsynergypartnership.weebly.com. In addition, my Twitter handle is mind_on_ASAP. And there's a little bit of a double entendre in there because Mind on ASAP. ASAP is Applied Synergies Partnership. And ASAP is the idea that we need to be doing the kinds of things that we're doing in my classroom for all students as soon as possible.
That's so well said. Well, thank you both for spending time with us. We wish everyone a very happy 2022. and look for some exciting updates on the NACCE podcast. We have some special surprises for you early in the year.
It's good to see you again, Becky. Thank you.
Thank you so
Nataliia,
much.
thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for joining us. We hope that listening to this podcast will help you to explore the many ways we might define entrepreneurship. Join us every other Wednesday for more episodes as we celebrate opportunity, learn from one another, and grow together. Subscribe to this podcast, connect with us on social media, and learn more about today's speakers at nacce.com/podcast. We look forward to making our way forward together with you.
Have you heard about our latest book, Impact Ed? How Community College Entrepreneurship Creates Equity and Prosperity? This is our roadmap for building back better in 50 states and globally. In each chapter, we share the inspiring stories of everyday entrepreneurs and explain how community colleges play a crucial role in their success. Visit us at nacce.com/impacted to order your copy now and join us in this work.